Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Radensky. I am the Senior Director for Education and Visitor Services at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm pleased to welcome all of you today to today's professional development program, which is called Elections in the History of the Holocaust and Today. Whatever side of the political spectrum we may fall, we see from our own time how important elections are in democratic societies. This was also the case in interwar Europe generally, and with the rise of the Nazis in particular. We have a special program for you this morning. John Q. Barrett will explore how elections in Germany in the 1920s and 1930s paved the way for the rise of the Nazis. Then Brian Carlin will share with us resources about elections that you will be able to use in your classrooms. Finally, if there's time, I will share some election materials from interwar Germany that we have in our collection at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. I will try to unpack them, and in doing so, examine how these posters and advertisements may be useful in your classrooms. Our program today is the third of the Fania Gottesfeld-Heller and Joseph Heller Professional Development Series, and is made possible through the generous sponsorship of Dr. Jacqueline Heller in memory of her parents, Fania Gottesfeld-Heller and Joseph Heller. This is just one of our many professional development programs for educators, and we hope you will join us for other programs as well. Our next program will be an in-person open house for teachers in grades 4 through 12 on November 11th. We will be offering guided tours of our exhibitions, so you will be able to sample the exhibitions and consider them for your students. And please join us also on Sunday, December 15th for Messages from Survivors, One Family's Holocaust Legacy. This program will feature an innovative approach that blends survivor testimony and experiences together with film and art in a very compelling way, and a way that's very accessible to students. For more information and to register for any of these programs, please check your email for our e-blast featuring our professional development programs, or go to our website, www.mjhnyc.org, and click events. Or you could go through the professional development part in the education section of the website. After each presentation, there will be time for questions. Throughout each presentation, please feel free to use the chat to input the questions, and we will hopefully address most of them as time permits in the end. At the end of the day today or tomorrow, we will send out an evaluation and CTLE credit form. Your feedback is important to us. Please complete the evaluation and return it to us as soon as possible. Very briefly, the schedule today is after this introduction, I'm going to turn the floor over to John Barrett. We'll have a break for about 10 minutes. We'll go to Brian Carlin. We'll do the final session about election posters, and we hope to end by about noon, maybe a little bit before noon. Okay. I'd like to now introduce our first speaker. John Q. Barrett is a professor of law at St. John's University in New York, where he teaches constitutional law, criminal procedure, and legal history. Professor Barrett is a renowned teacher, writer, commentator, and lecturer on law and history topics in the United States and internationally. He has been a Museum of Jewish Heritage lecturer and teacher on multiple occasions. Professor Barrett is writing a biography of U.S. Supreme Court Justice and Nuremberg Chief Prosecutor Robert H. Jackson. It will include the first inside account of Jackson's service during World War II by appointment of President Truman as prosecutor of the principal surviving Nazi leaders for war crimes. Professor Barrett discovered, edited, and published Justice Jackson's now acclaimed memoir, That Man, an insider portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt, which is both FDR's biography and Jackson's autobiography. Professor Barrett, regular Jackson List emails, hundreds are archived at thejacksonlist.com, reach well over 100,000 readers, including many teachers and students around the world. So today, we're very honored to have Professor Barrett. He will speak about how elections in the Weimar Republic in the 20s and in the early 30s paved the way for the rise of the Nazis. And I think without any further ado, I'm really pleased and honored to turn the mic over to Professor Barrett.
Thank you so much, Paul, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you, at least in this virtual sense. Like you, I'm a teacher who doesn't have school today because of Election Day, but we are working. I think we're always working. And I think what you're doing today is a particular worthy kind of work. I am virtue signaling because first thing this morning I went and voted, so there's my sticker. And I do want to remind each of you in the context of this topic and generally your role modeling and educating to cast your own votes. I think it's an important, precious thing for us each to do, however we think politically. A few more thanks. Thanks to Dr. Heller for the sponsorship, and to Aaliyah Shawn and Paul again for their organizational work and for making this work, and to Brian Carlin from the DOE for his contribution coming later. Today's title, Elections in the History of the Holocaust and Today, is something that I want to unfold in 5 parts. So here's my roadmap. First, I'm going to talk about today and really begin with a caution that I want us to be careful as we think about this topic. Second, I'm going to talk briefly just about me and you and introduce myself and how I think I hope have some material and ideas that can assist you in your teaching. Third, I'm going to talk about elections generally, and it will conclude by getting to Germany, but I'm actually going to talk about a few American elections first. Fourth, the heart of this lecture is going to be talking about Hitler, elections, the Nazis coming to power, and the path from democratic Weimar Germany to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And fifth, I'll conclude with some few final thoughts and some recommendations. So part one, today, Election Day in the US is a moment to be thinking domestically about our voting and to be working historically, but I think separately in the topics, the Hitler Holocaust area that we will be considering. And I want to be careful and explicit that this is not about one being the other or these being two sides of the same coin. The German Nazis of the 1920s through the 1940s were a category of one. So evil, so impactful, and so unique that they deserve the historical spotlight and study that we give them. The Nazis stood for murderous, planned exterminationism, which is also a thing unto itself, and produced the European Holocaust of 1933 through 1945, also a thing of itself. So this specific program is about past elections. And I don't want to be misunderstood to be winking or suggesting anything about today. People should carefully reflect and do their own political thinking and draw their own parallels if they see them, and also draw their own distinctions. But at a general level, considering Nazis coming to power through elections is about the general possibility of anti-democratic authoritarians, in other words, people who hate democracy, using democracy to win power so as to bring about the demise of democracy. That is the general category that we're in as we consider Hitler. We are also considering governing. So elections is just the on-ramp, if you will, to the exercise of government power, and part of the story of elections and how losers and ideas get assimilated into power and become winners and govern is also part of this historical story. So yes, there may well be parallels. There are commonalities. There is general theory to consider from past to present. But my bottom line with this first part is to say explicitly, be careful, be deliberate, make your points explicitly if you wish to make them about current events, as I am trying to be as I do this. Part two, let me say a little bit about me. And in this context, let me share my screen. Bear with me for a moment. So this is a front page. Welcome to what Paul has already said, and there's my name and the title of this program. I am an American law professor at St. John's in New York City. I teach American constitutional law that includes our foundational document, our supreme law of the land, and much of its history of being interpreted through the work of the US Supreme Court. In particular, I am a biographer, a judicial biographer, a legal biographer of this fellow. This is Robert H. Jackson in his judicial robes. He served on the U.S. Supreme Court from 1941 through 1954. So he's appointed by President Franklin Roosevelt, and he serves during the Roosevelt years, during the Truman administration, into the Eisenhower administration. He is part of the unanimous Supreme Court that decided Brown versus Board of Education in the spring of 1954, and Robert H. Jackson died 5 months later in October of 1954. Through my work on the Supreme Court and my work on Jackson, I have become a student, a writer, a commentator, and an expert on 20th century history, and particularly politics. This is the Oval Office and President Franklin D. Roosevelt shaking Jackson's hand in the summer of 1941, having just signed the commission that made Jackson a Supreme Court justice. As his wife and his daughter look on, the back left corner is the Secretary of Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, whose family, by the way, has been very important in incubating and supporting the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Robert Morgenthau, our late district attorney, was the son of that Treasury Secretary, Henry Morgenthau Jr. Jackson's path from law in New York State to the government is a function of Franklin Roosevelt, who he knew through Democratic Party politics and supported. Roosevelt becomes governor, Roosevelt becomes president. That pulls Jackson to Washington, and Jackson rises something like a meteor through the executive branch. He becomes the Solicitor General of the United States, the Attorney General of the United States. Here in 1941, at age 49, he becomes a Supreme Court justice. And if events had taken different turns, Jackson might well have been seated at that desk. But of course, Roosevelt instead ran for a third term and a fourth term, and Jackson was a judge for the rest of his life. But he was not only a judge, and here's where we take the turn towards Hitler. When Roosevelt died in April of 1945, Harry Truman, on the left, of course, inherited the presidency. Notice the ashtray filled with cigarette butts. They run a healthier Oval Office these days. That's Robert Jackson on the right, who Harry Truman reached out to 2 weeks on the job in April of 1945 to ask Jackson to, although a Supreme Court justice, do a task for the executive branch, for the president. You see, during World War II, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin were a military alliance. And at a certain point, the military, economic, and population might made it clear that the Allies would defeat Nazi Germany. And then they began to think about accountability processes that would follow the war. And so in Moscow in the fall of 43, at Yalta in the winter of 45, the Allies are making a commitment that for the arch criminals of Nazism, the planners who bring it into being and then embark on discrimination and oppression internally in Germany and then military aggression outside of Germany, they will, once defeated, captured by the Allies, be held accountable internationally by the Allies for the crime of World War II and all the ancillary consequences, including the human civilian suffering that we learn and attach the word Holocaust to. This needs a huge lawyer. It needs really the country's leading legal figure. And so Truman recruits Robert Jackson to do that job. And that becomes, over 1945, 1946, the one and only international Nuremberg trial of the arch criminal Nazi war criminals. This is Jackson, as it's being publicly announced in May of 1945 that he will be using his summer recess from the Supreme Court to prosecute Nazis. It turned out to take a whole lot longer. It took a whole year. And so Jackson misses a year at the Supreme Court and is immersed in Nazis, history, prosecution, and really discovering and beginning to comprehend the Holocaust. As a Jackson biographer, all of that is my path into these topics. This is Jackson signing for the United States, the document in the summer of 1945 that creates the International Military Tribunal, this Nuremberg court, the world's first international court. And this is Jackson at the podium in Nuremberg, Germany, southeastern Germany, north of Munich, where this trial occurred from November of 1945 into October of 1946. These are the defendants. 21 surviving leading representatives of Nazism, of the sectors of power, political power, military power, both army and naval, economic power, diplomatic power, propaganda, treaty making, banking, concentration camps, slave labor, philosophy, publications. These are the defendants. And we will return later in the lecture to a particular aspect of these defendants, which will be part of the story that I'm about to turn to. You are, as I understand it, middle school and high school teachers, and I applaud you. As a law professor, I stand on the shoulders of all the good work that you do. We, meaning law professors, but much more broadly, the country and the world needs your excellent teaching. And so really, I thank you, and I hope this assists you a bit. Some of you teach history, American history, international history, European history. Some of you might teach religion. Some of you might teach Jewish studies. This, I hope, touches whatever aspects of teaching are particularly your work. We begin now with my third part, which is elections. And we will come to this fellow. Of course, this is Hitler. This is Hitler actually in the heart of Nuremberg at one of the Nuremberg party rallies during the 1930s. They were held annually in the fall. But I want to talk about 3 American elections before I get to Hitler. So I'm actually going to back up to Harry Truman, because the first one I want to talk about is 1948. We think of the famous Chicago Tribune headline blooper published for the early morning edition, Wednesday, the day after Election Day, Dewey beats Truman, which of course isn't what happened. We forget that that was actually a 4-candidate race, because in addition to the Republican nominee, Thomas Dewey, the governor of New York, and the incumbent Democratic president, Harry Truman of Missouri, there were 2 other candidates in the race. Henry Wallace, the former vice president of the United States, was running as the candidate of a left party, an internationalist party, a peace party, and a comity with communism party. But I want to focus on the 4th candidate. This was Strom Thurmond of South Carolina. Governor Thurmond was the nomination of the Dixiecrat Party through a convention process, through ballot access, through enthusiastic popular participation. And the program of the Dixiecrats was racial hate. The Dixiecrats were Southern segregationists. It was basically the states of the old Confederacy. And what they hated was the admittedly slow, but now post-World War II, actually developing movements towards reconsidering American segregation, improving the place of Blacks in America, confronting racial segregation and striking it down. In particular, Harry Truman, as president of the United States in 1948, had ordered the integration of the American Armed Forces, had signed legislation that was about non-discrimination in working and housing. Harry Truman, although from a border state and a painful racial history in Missouri, had become really the power representative of what we would call the early civil rights movement in government in the late 1940s. And Strom Thurmond and the Dixiecrats are seeking, through the democratic process, to achieve power, to win election, and to stop and maybe wind back that progress. So obviously, Thurmond doesn't win, and neither does Dewey. Truman wins re-election to this term in his own right. But that's an effort by what I think is fair to call discriminators, haters, authoritarians, anti-democrats, to use democratic processes to achieve political power. A second example, I don't have a slide of this, but I point you to 1968, when the American presidential election, we remember, was Richard Nixon defeating the incumbent vice president, Hubert Humphrey, by a squeaker. We forget, perhaps, that it was a 3-candidate race, that the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, who actually had run an earlier version of this campaign 4 years earlier, was now a powerful third-party candidate of the American Independent Party. Wallace won southern states. He earned 13% of the vote nationwide. He won 45 electoral votes. And basically, the program of his party was what he had said in the schoolhouse door a few years earlier in Alabama. Segregation now, segregation forever. In other words, the Dixiecrat 1948 program was still and ongoing a political force, now represented by George Wallace, fighting against the Civil Rights Program that Lyndon Johnson had succeeded, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and other aspects of the Civil Rights Movement that had achieved progress, far from complete progress, but progress through government. Wallace is running democratically, popular candidate to seek power in office to impose the old ways, the rollback, segregation, white supremacy. A third election to consider. This is a different topic, but in the general category of the democratic process being used politically to oppress. In 1996, heading into his reelection campaign, President Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act. And the Defense of Marriage Act was a response to conservative, religious, and somewhat state litigation fearing civil rights movements on behalf of gay Americans. Today we would say LGBTQ+. And what the Defense of Marriage DOMA Act did was define 4 federal purposes, in other words, the spousal tax exemption, etc., for federal purposes, marriage as only a marriage between one man and one woman. Whatever a state did in permitting same-sex marriage, whatever other nations did, which then would be recognized by states as permitting same-sex marriage, would not under DOMA be represented by, would not be recognized by the United States. And DOMA passes overwhelmingly. It's a bipartisan, almost by acclamation statute that Clinton signs, not on camera, but signs in 1996. And it diffuses from his reelection campaign any conservative concern that he was a gay rights president and that we were moving in a direction that that constituency opposed. Now, again, I'm not equating President Clinton with Thurmond or Wallace, with restraint on gay rights with rollbacks in favor of segregation, but it is an anti-human rights use of political power in the context of election. The DOMA story, of course, continues. It's not an issue in the 2000 campaign when George W. Bush becomes president over Al Gore. It is an issue in President Bush's reelection campaign when he runs hard in 2004 against states liberalizing gay rights protections. And he's standing strong on DOMA and wins a squeaker over Senator John Kerry. And probably in swing states, that's an issue. The Supreme Court is the force that finishes off DOMA in the Windsor case, declaring as a matter of both due process and equal protection that this discrimination against one type of marriage versus another violates our supreme law. But that's another example of elected officials, political power, governing power, and oppression. Now, finally, I want to mention Germany. The fourth thing I want to talk about is Germany during this time period, 1919 through 1945. I'm especially going to focus on the years 1932 to 1933. This is the time period of Weimar Germany. And so I want to talk to the specific topic, my main part, Hitler, elections, power, and the Holocaust. And I have quite a few subpoints here that I want to go into. First, just as a framework, note that the form of government that we're talking about in Germany under the Weimar Republic is parliamentary democracy. It's not our US constitutional system, which is quadrennial elections, fixed terms, executive power separated from legislative power. Parliamentary systems do have terms, and they do often have a separate structure of an elected executive. Germany had that. But there's flexibility within governments under their own laws and traditions to bring themselves down, to bring on new elections, thus votes of no confidence and governments collapsing and so forth. So that is generally the framework of this pre-Nazi Germany that we're talking about, parliamentary democracy. Second, it is Weimar Germany, W-E-I-M-A-R, Weimar, the city in central Germany where this constitution after the Great War, what we call World War I, was brought into being. It was a functioning parliamentary democracy. Weimar Germany is often sort of dismissed with a stereotype that it was chaotic, it was paralyzed by hyperinflation, it was governments rising and falling chaotically, it was a mess and a disaster. There's some truth to that, but there's a lot of potted history in that. For example, hyperinflation in Germany had basically been beaten back by 1923, a version of what our country, if I may, has experienced this year as inflation from the past couple of years has come down to very manageable levels. Secondly, there was in Weimar Germany, as in the United States and elsewhere in the world, after 1923 up until the stock market financial crash of 1929, the roaring 20s, high employment, high income, high prosperity, high fun, music, theater, culture, dance, excitement, fashion, and lots of happy people. In Weimar Germany, the structure under the Weimar Constitution was both a presidency, this is, in other words, the head of state, and a chancellor, in other words, the head of government. Think, for analogy, of the King of England. He is the head of state, King Charles III, and compare the prime minister, who is the head of government because the head of the party, Keir Starmer, that has the parliamentary majority. In Weimar Germany, as of 1932, the president was Paul von Hindenburg, age 86, a hero of 19th century militarism into the Great War. He is loosely, very loosely, the monarch, in a sense, the head of state. Of course, the actual previous head of state, the Kaiser, had fled and was living and dying in exile, and this was now constitutional government, not a monarchical government. But there's a bit of a continuity between a figurehead leader in the presidency between monarchical Germany and now constitutional Weimar Germany. In 1932, a German military general, Kurt von Schleicher, and we will return to him, Schleicher, Schleicher, persuades Hindenburg, a bit of a military peer, not quite a generational peer, but somebody who Hindenburg trusts. Schleicher persuades Hindenburg to make a centrist conservative figure named Franz von Papen, Papen, the chancellor. And Schleicher on the outside, having persuaded Hindenburg to select from the parliamentary elected leadership a minority party head von Papen to be the chancellor, Papen then makes Schleicher the Ministry of Defense. So there's a bit of a sort of back-scratching circle. So the starting point before we turn to the Nazis is Hindenburg as the president, von Papen as the chancellor, running a coalition government comprised of minority parties, it's not an outright minority, and with a cabinet that includes Schleicher as his Minister of Defense. Now the next particular topic. Adolf Hitler, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and their ascent. The first topic, of course, to put in the spotlight, at least briefly, is Hitler himself. A vast, complicated, mysterious, deeply evil, and thoroughly studied and theorized and psychoanalyzed historical figure. And many great biographies, much excellent work for one who wants to do the work to understand Hitler. To boil it all down in a very oversimplified fashion, Adolf Hitler, a man in his early 1950s, by this early 1930s period, is a man of hatreds. His hatreds include everything about democratic German government and what democratic Germany is laboring under in the aftermath of the defeat in the Great War. That's when this party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, the Nazi party, takes shape. It is a populist movement. It is seeking to appeal to right-wing nationalists and left-wing socialists, thus National Socialism, by opposing their common enemy, elites, people whose lives are, at least in perception, better than yours. This includes Jewish bankers who are demonized and stereotyped as the force who manipulated Germany and caused the Kaiser and the German government's 1919 surrender during a world war that they were winning, the so-called stab in the back theory. And these enemies were the elites and the forces behind the Treaty of Versailles that followed, and its terms, which to nationalists were deeply humiliating. This includes Germany's territorial losses of colonies, the prohibitions on German armament and armed forces maintenance, the sort of pacification of Germany, Germany's obligations to pay reparations to the parties who had defeated it during the war, the financial burdens, and all of the psychological, economic, political negativity that followed from that. The Nazis, the supporters of the Nazis, and Hitler at the lead of this movement hated all who had brought this down upon them. They're a fringe party. Nazis, our word, is a derogatory nickname, sort of a little bit of an acronym on NSDAP, which of course they embrace and make their own. In 1921, Hitler, who of course was an Austrian, a veteran of the Great War, seizes control of the party. It's rabble, it's chaotic, but Hitler emerges 2 years after the war as the leading figure in the NSDAP. 2 years later, he and his paramilitary brawlers, armed forces, attempt to overthrow the government in Bavaria. This is the Munich Beer Hall Putsch. It's a nickname that accurately describes where it was and what it was, but makes it too easy to think that this is just a little bit of a drunken thing. This is an armed, planned, hostage-taking, serious effort to capture the government. And it briefly, overnight, seems to be succeeding, and then it's put down through much violence and bloodshed by the military and law enforcement the next day. So the government has faced an actual military attack and prevailed against the Nazis, and that results in Hitler's arrest, Hitler being convicted, and Hitler being sent to Landsberg prison in Bavaria to serve his term. And that's a little bit less than 2 years. While there in prison, 1923-24, he writes his memoir, Mein Kampf, which is horrible writing, both in prose and in content, but a remarkably candid document, and in time a German bestseller. It is a program. It is a philosophy. It is an autobiography. It is a canon of hatreds. And on release, Hitler becomes leader of nationalist political factions that are uniting under this NSDAP flag and banner. He has a paramilitary force, the SA by initials, under the leadership of Ernst Röhm, R-O-H-M. And Röhm, I guess is an American way of saying it, is a military commander reporting to Hitler. It's a private army. And they beat, and they brutalize, and often they kill. They also have a fairly skilled press operation under the leadership of Joseph Goebbels, G-O-E-B-B-E-L-S, who becomes in time the master of Nazi governmental propaganda. He's at Hitler's side and helping Hitler with his words and his messaging from this 1920s period forward. They have a goal. Their goal is to destroy the political system. The political system was, as Hitler saw things, responsible for all that I cataloged earlier. And thus, their program is to win election in a political system that they want to blow up. They run in parliamentary elections. They never win a majority in the parliament. This is a glimpse of the Weimar Parliament. You see it's a very large legislative body. The Nazis never become the controlling majority faction. Yet through elections, they are brought into government, to leadership power, the chancellorship, the job that I said was von Papen's in 1932, and in time to unrestricted emergency power. And so I want to dig down into that story. They are brought there, the Nazis, to power to a degree by voters. They are also brought there by people in government, by other more rational elected officials and their powerful supporters, who think at various points, it turns out deeply erroneously, that they can work with Hitler, that in ways they will be able to control him for their purposes by bringing him into government. This includes corporate leaders who believe that Hitler will bring stability in the short term because his street brawlers and violent paramilitaries will cease that conduct once he's in a ministry, in a government. It includes leaders of other political parties alongside the NSDAP on the political spectrum. At times, it includes, for instance, the communists, who believe that Hitler can be part of a path to their greater social revolution. So unlike the corporate leaders who think Hitler can be calmed, the communists are interested in Hitler because they think Hitler can bring on revolution and it will lead towards the communist goals. More modestly on the left, socialists and labor leaders also at various points are supportive of Hitler. As in past turmoils, they think by sticking to the formalities of law and letting the Nazis become part of coalitions or Hitler be selected for power, the law will keep control on Hitler, just like it's kept controls on other political leaders. This also includes Catholics and other traditional parties on the right. Their philosophy, to boil it down, is that really Hitler is too crazy to remain in power too long, so let's touch it, use it, incorporate it, and watch it spend itself and disappear. All of these thought Hitler would pass from the scene, that in the longer run, they, not he, would emerge with power and control. And in our phrase, that all turned out to be magical thinking. So let me turn to the next part, specifically elections in 1932. And I want to go through a sequence of 4 elections that are the march of Hitler and the Nazis on the outside up to Hitler as the chancellor. First is the March 1932 presidential election. Separate from the legislature, the Reichstag, the parliament that you see before you, there are presidential elections to a 7-year term. That's what Hindenburg had won in 1925, and now he is running for re-election in 1932. Hitler and others run against him for the presidency. It produces a runoff, but ultimately it produces the re-election of Hindenburg. So the head of state, the executive power, the power to select among parliamentary party representatives to be the chancellor, remains in the hands of Hindenburg. Second, the July 1932 parliamentary election. This is Hitler campaigning not in the crazed film clips you've seen, but as a relatively sane candidate. He actually records a record album, which in its time was very important because radio was the means of communication. Somebody referred to this as a very effective early podcast. He appeals to the middle in these parliamentary elections. He's hoping to gain something from each side, both left and right. And the NSDAP in this July 1932 parliamentary election wins 37% of the vote. In other words, 230 of the 608 seats that you see before you in the Reichstag. They are now the leading party, but of course they are below being a 50% party. That's a disappointment to Hitler and to Goebbels. They did not win the disaffected workers of the left, which was their idea of what they were going to pull in. They gained more from middle and right, but that only got them up to their 37%. The disaffected left would have been necessary to get up to 50%, and they didn't win it. And it turns out that this 37% is in parliamentary elections the Nazis' high watermark before Hitler becomes the chancellor. Ordinarily, that would mean President Hindenburg would appoint Hitler to be the chancellor. In other words, the prime minister, the head of the legislative form of government. He's a party leader. He's subject to the control of his party members. He's under the control of the Reichstag as a body. He's ultimately under the control of the president. There's not so much to fear. But Hindenburg, having just defeated Hitler in the presidential election, and the seated chancellor von Papen, whose party was weaker than the Nazi party, are anti-Hitler. despite all the prospects of controlling him. So they think he doesn't really want to be chancellor. They think he really wants to be a noisemaker and trouble on the outside, but they don't want him on the inside. And so in this summer of 1932 period, the formal decision is made to continue with Papen as the chancellor, to leave Hitler on the outside heading his party in the Reichstag, and for the aging Hindenburg to push forward with that form of government. The defense minister, Schleicher, who I mentioned earlier, disagrees. He favors making Hitler chancellor as part of really a two-part game. He believes that he in the short term, they in the short term can tame Hitler, that the NSDAP forces can be brought into power, and that their power will move from Hitler to a real strong man who should be the chancellor going forward after a Hitler interval. And Schleicher, General Schleicher, sees himself as that kind of strongman. So bringing Hitler in as a brief chancellor will transfer NSDAP power and enthusiasm, Schleicher believes, to himself and his party and his chancellorship, succeeding as a true strongman. The Social Democrats on the left don't really resist this. As I said earlier, they have some faith in the rule of law and they're permissive. But Hindenburg does. So the idea is percolating. There is now a third election in November of 1932. The Nazis lose seat. They recede from their high water mark of the July election. And there's additional maneuvering in the government about who this divided Reichstag party leadership should have as the person to be selected up if someone is going to be a chancellor succeeding Papen. Schleicher tries to get Hindenburg at this point to fire Papen, and Papen resists. He goes, although briefly fired, he goes to Hitler and says, we should be a coalition. And so now a fourth election. In January of 1933, a regional election is a very mediocre result for the Nazis, but it's used very effectively by Goebbels and Hitler to claim rise and power. So this is not a Reichstag election. This is a regional government. But this is enough to cause Hindenburg to really think he has to address this bubbling, constant, powerful Hitler recognition argument. And so at this point, he fires Papen. At this point, he makes Schleifer the chancellor. But then he reconsiders and fires Schleifer because Papen, on the outside, has persuaded Hindenburg that he should really appoint Hitler, who Papen is now in alliance with. And I apologize for the blizzard of names. We're basically talking about four characters. We're talking about the president, Hindenburg, and we're talking about the other three, Papen, the chancellor, Schleicher, briefly the chancellor, and Hitler, the leader of the largest party in the Reichstag, being the figures who are being jockeyed around to form a persuasive, powerful argument for Hindenburg to pick one of them to be the chancellor. And he's had an interlude with Papen. He's had a brief interlude with Schleicher. And now in early 1933, Hindenburg, is persuaded by Papen to get rid of Schleicher and to bring in Hitler. The famous quote from Hindenburg, age 86, to Papen at this point in time is, "You mean to tell me I have the unpleasant task of appointing this Hitler as the next chancellor?" This Hitler. In other words, kind of holding his nose, but recognizing and having an optimistic view that there's power out there and believing that it can be tamed by bringing it inside. The conservatives, in other words, bottom line, thought they had Hitler boxed in, and so they bring him in. And so the next part and the next topic, Hitler in power. This is Hindenburg near the end of his presidency. This is Papen in the time of his chancellorship. This is Schleicher in the time of his heading the defense ministry. And this is Hitler on his first day as chancellor of the new German government. Elections, jockeying, governing, and now bringing him in. To the left is Hermann Goering, who is the Reichsmarshal, Hitler's number 2. And to the right in the other chair is Franz von Papen, the conservative, stately figure who had lost his chancellorship and who had used Hitler and his optimism about Hitler as his tool against Schleicher and undermining Schleicher's chancellorship. And so this is day one in January of 1933. And from here comes the flood, because through democracy, through negotiating, through the uses of governmental powers, there's now executive power in the hands of Hitler and the NSDAP. A month later, a mysterious fire burns the legislature, the Reichstag. This is the Reichstag fire, which Hitler, the chancellor, the NSDAP, propaganda, Goebbels, etc., blame on the communists. And of course, it's an emergency for the Congress, the legislature, to be attacked. That was the fourth plane concern on 9/11. That was our obvious concern when we saw it happening on January 6th in 2021. And in response to this fire and the threat of civil war that it might portend, Hitler issues emergency decrees. The Reichstag issues emergency decrees. Hindenburg resigns and in effect hands the presidency to Chancellor Hitler. So Hitler now is united in absolute executive power atop the government. He is the head of state. He is the head of government. He is the Führer. And the promulgation of a principle that he is the law, the so-called Führerprinzip, is really born in this time period. The Nazis have taken over the German state. Within 2 months, Germany opens its first concentration camp at Dachau, which is just north of Munich and in Bavaria. And a former munitions plant is converted into a detention facility. It's for summary confinement of enemies of the Reich, instead of arrests and trials and the need to have proof and that slow, laborious process of the rule of law. This is paramilitaries and now government police arresting and confining enemies of the Reich. This includes communists. This includes socialists. This includes religious figures on the left and right, Jehovah's Witnesses, some Catholics. It includes, in large numbers, Jews, people who are believed to be enemies of the Reich, threats to the peace and stability, and the unalloyed executive power that's now in the hands of Chancellor Hitler. In the fall of 1933, the first of the Nazi Party rallies is held. Nuremberg is the spiritual home that the Nazis adopt. It's north of Dachau, north of Munich. It is a castle city of the Holy Roman Empire. And the conceit is that that First Reich and the Second Reich of Otto von Bismarck are now in a continuity continued with this Third Reich in the hands of Adolf Hitler. And so the castle city and the large open field that's turned into the rally grounds, the Zeppelin field, the torches, the parades, the speeches, the marches, the patriotism, the beer drinking, is a place for fervent German progress to assemble and feel pride in itself. September of 1933, and each September thereafter through 1938. In 1934, Hitler turns on his own paramilitaries, the so-called Night of the Long Knives. And this is the purge that takes out Ernst Röhm and others who are potential physical power threats to Hitler's unalloyed unilateral control. The Reichstag, the legislature, is reduced to a rubber stamp under this leadership of Chancellor President Führer Hitler. So the Reichstag, for instance, meets in Nuremberg in 1935, and in a ceremonial promulgation, this is a picture of a Nuremberg rally. Sorry, I didn't click to this earlier. And this is a picture of Dachau. In 1935, the Nuremberg Party rally is the site of a Reichstag session that enacts the Nuremberg laws. And these are laws that define by executive decree who is eligible and who is disqualified from being a citizen of the Reich. Focus on the second and last columns on the right side, Judah, the Jewish column, and the 3 black dots and the 4 black dots at the top. This is eugenicist madness, but these are family tree diagrams, and those are grandparents. 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, according to the Nuremberg laws, meant that one was a Jew. And by the way, this wasn't a matter of self-definition, religious fate, autonomous choice. It doesn't matter if you say, I'm Catholic, I'm Lutheran, I'm agnostic, I'm atheist. a Nazi bureaucratic process would determine whether your grandparents, in fact, were Jews, however they thought of themselves, whatever their faith and religious observance was. And from that flowed these consequences, and from the Nuremberg laws flowed ineligibility to be a citizen of the Reich, ineligibility to practice various professions, including law and medicine, ineligibility to run private businesses, ineligibility to have bank accounts and other holdings above certain very minimal levels. This was dispossession and legal force driving people into emigration and, frankly, also into suicide. In 1938, one more step during this time period is military buildup. The Versailles Treaty and the disarmament limits, the reparation requirements are disregarded and are first broken out of secretly, covertly, but then explicitly. And there's a military buildup that causes Austria to capitulate and causes the partition of Czechoslovakia and causes the agreement at Munich in 1938. All of that is this rising Nazi power that is governmental power that came originally through the electoral process. And in fall of 1938 in November comes Kristallnacht. This is allegedly spontaneous, but of course planned violence, attacks on synagogues and Jewish businesses. And in the summer of 1939 comes an agreement with the USSR and then a Nazi invasion of Poland. And now World War II is on as military aggression. Now I make a jump to the Nuremberg trial, because this is a place where accountability, which includes factual development and understanding, is brought into a courtroom and through this public trial brought to the knowledge of the world. This is a witness testifying in April of 1946 at the Nuremberg trial. He is Rudolf Höss. He was the commandant of Auschwitz during 1942 and 1943. He was a fugitive until captured in March of 1946, and then he's brought by the British to Nuremberg, where he is called by one of the defendants to testify. And on the stand here, Höss testifies a small fact that's helpful to one of the defendants. I never saw this man in Auschwitz. And then on cross-examination, in full horrific detail to the prosecutors on what he did as the commandant of Auschwitz. He claimed that he had carried out the orders he'd been given and had exterminated over 2 million Jews. Holocaust historiography now, it's grim to say, concludes that he exaggerated the number, but still well over 1 million went by train to sorting platform, and many to the showers, which were gas chambers, were exterminated by design. Their bodies were cremated, and those who were sorted the other direction were relegated to slave labor, and many were worked to death in the arms production and efforts to keep the German economy going during the last years of the war. Höss brings that all to the witness stand as evidence. And it's evidence against the Nuremberg defendants, the defendants who are charged with conspiring and planning together to come to power, to capture Germany, to do the intra-German oppressions that I've cataloged, and then to become military aggressors and go on the march, breaching their treaty obligations, throwing the European continent into war, conquering nations to the east, oppressing their people, committing war crimes, and committing crimes against humanity, including extermination of nearly 6 million Jews. And I've shrunken this photo to allow you to focus on 2 of the defendants who were captured and became part of this Nuremberg trial accountability process, because we have already seen and touched on them earlier in the story. In the lower left, in the front corner of the defendant's box, is Hermann Göring, who was the Reichsmarshal, Hitler's number 2, seated to Hitler's right in that photo of Hitler in his first day, January of 1933, as the Chancellor of Germany, brought in by Hindenburg. And in this photo, in the upper right corner, in the back row, with his arms crossed across his chest, is Franz von Papen, the former Chancellor, Hindenburg's Chancellor, 1931-2 into 1933, rival contending with Schleicher, Papen, who brings Hitler in as a way of controlling him, but then, of course, continues to work with him and for him in the planning that goes forward. An irony is that Papen, because of age, and frankly, because he's not a Nazi from the beginning, he's a coalition builder and bringing Hitler in for his purposes, is somewhat pushed out to remote roles by Hitler during the Nazi period. And so Papen serves, for instance, as Nazi Germany's ambassador in Turkey. Goering, by contrast, is at Hitler's right hand, and everything military buildup, breakout, aggression of the 1930s is Goering's conduct. And so this tribunal at Nuremberg, this prosecution of the war, the prosecution of the Nazis for the conspiracy and planning, in the end convicts Goering and acquits Papen. My last section, and this is one visual, sorry. This is the blue series or blue set, which is the public transcripts of the Nuremberg trials. They're, of course, online in many places. The audio of the trial is online. Only because there was a Nuremberg trial am I able to give a lecture like this. Are historians able to do the kind of work that they do to understand in full detail what the Third Reich was, how Hitler came to power, how planning used the government powers to become military aggressors and internal oppressors, and embarked on the final solution, the Holocaust and the toll across Europe. My final topic is to make a couple of careful conclusions and then a recommendation or two. My careful conclusions are that democracy is a treasure, but democracy is vulnerable to bad choices. And the story of the parliamentary process and jockeying and power centers treating this extremely dangerous, violent, crazed philosophy-driven anti-democracy theorist, militarist, leader Adolf Hitler into the government is to bring in the demise of democracy itself. The hopeful message of that is the flip side, that elections and democracy are a chance to be educated, informed, discerning, and the hope is to avoid making such horrible choices. The recommendations are as follows. First, online, there's lots of information, of course, about all of this. The MJH website itself and its galleries for when you visit in person have incredibly important and bite-sized aspects of this information and are there for study and learning from your students up to those of you who are in PhD programs, etc. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum website also, and its galleries also, and its online Holocaust encyclopedia particularly, is another way to dig into this and read in a compact place Hindenburg, Papen, Hitler, Schleicher, the 1932 elections, etc., the Nuremberg trials, and get handles on pieces of this that are relevant. But I want to particularly recommend this book, written by Timothy Ryback, a historian. It's called Takeover, as you see, Hitler's Final Rise to Power, published this year. And Tim Ryback is a friend. This is a fantastic book. This is really the platform that I stand on in giving this lecture. It is the detailed account of these political intrigues, democracy stumbling into Hitler coming to power, and then the demise of democracy under Nazi Germany. And I couldn't recommend it more highly. For an introduction to it, I also recommend a review of it that Adam Gopnik of the New Yorker magazine published in the March 25, 2024 issue. That is available online, and also a New Yorker podcast, The Political Scene, in which editor David Remnick interviewed Adam Gopnik about his review of Tim Ryback's book. It may seem like way too much detail about events way too far in the past. But Weimar Germany, for its bumps and challenges, was a real and functioning and succeeding democracy. But it was vulnerable to exactly that, democracy, the people, the campaigning, the messaging, the voting, and then how governments got built and changed and what they pursued thereafter. And all of that is a hope and much better than dictatorship, authoritarianism, not having a democratic opportunity to begin with. But it's a very sobering, cautionary tale that it's ours to use well, or it's ours to screw up. So thank you for your interest and attention. It's fun to be in this conversation with you, and now I look forward to actually starting the conversation. I welcome your questions.
Thank, thank you so much, Professor Barrett. What a fantastic presentation. I'm trying to turn on my video, but have not figured out how to do it yet. In any
Okay.
event,
And that's the URL to my Jackson List website, which is a few essays a month. You're all welcome to subscribe, and that's my email address. Feel free to be in touch. I welcome continuing contact.
fantastic. Let's take a look. Let's see if I can hide non-view. Okay, well, in any event, I hope everybody can hear me. I want to again thank Professor Jackson for Professor Barrett for a fantastic presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you so much, everybody, for responding that you can hear. Fascinating and scary. We do have some time for a couple of questions. And I saw that there were some questions that were already here in the chat. So please feel free to submit questions in the chat, and we'll read them to Professor Barrett. Okay, so here's a question here, which is, would you say it's more accurate to state that the leaders of German corporations only supported Hitler after he came to power, or was there some support for him and the Nazi Party in the beginning?
There is some support before he becomes chancellor. That's the way to cause economic stability to rise is to end violence in the street. And so if you can diffuse the SA, the paramilitaries that are part of the Nazi Party by bringing Hitler into the government, that's in the business interests. And so there is business support that predates him being chancellor.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, I see. I'm just reading through the questions here. Here's a question about what is the historical consensus on the possibility of the Reichstag fire being secretly caused by the Nazis as a catalyst to pursue complete power?
Historical consensus is always a dangerous phrase. I prefer to think of history as a continuing argument. But there is a historical consensus, I think, that it is not easy to say with certainty who torched the Reichstag. One possibility is that it was an outsider, a personal grievance, an act of arson. Another possibility is that it was the Nazis, that it was an inside job to give them a pretext for emergency decrees. And there's historiography from the Nuremberg trials forward that sort of swings back and forth on that question. At the Nuremberg trial, there is considerable evidence that the Nazis planned and did the Reichstag fire as their own pretext, but it was denied by some of the defendants, including Hermann Goering. There is, I think, revisionist and revisions of revision history thereafter. The most recent and powerful work I've seen moves back to the theory that it was the Nazis. Whoever did it, it turned out to be, of course, the cause, the occasion for Hindenburg's resignation, Hitler becoming elevated to the presidency in addition to the chancellorship, emergency powers being conferred on him, and everything that flowed therefrom.
Right. They took advantage, whether they did it or not, they took advantage of the opportunity.
Indeed.
Here's another question. Going back to earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that the economy had improved in the 20s. Were there still major economic problems that fueled the rise of the Nazi Party?
There's certainly, there's always economic problems. I don't think any place or population is 100% satisfied. And I should say, as a caveat, I'm not a German history expert. I'm not even a German speaker, a bad beginner German. So I would cautiously say a parliamentary spectrum of parties is a spectrum of perspectives. And, the kind of workers' parties, both the communists, the socialist, labor parties, and so forth, had plenty of economic issues that continued to concern them after 1923, and that sort of post-hyperinflation, pre-financial crash period that I called the Roaring Twenties. And on the other hand, business interests, wealthier people, elites had happier days.
Thank you. I'm just looking at a few of these questions here. Okay. How did the Nazi Party appeal to women voters who gained the right to the vote in the Weimar Republic, and were they successful?
That's a great question. I don't know very much about that. The Nazi team leadership messaging is very male dominated, of course. There is a sort of maidens league and auxiliary and so forth, and the kind of the noble place of German motherhood is a big part of the nationalist part of the program of the Nazis. I don't have a sense of how deeply appealing that is during the electoral years. It's a big part of the 1933 and thereafter assembly support marching enthusiasm for Hitler.
Thank you. Here's one more question, and I think this is probably going to be our last question. Do you think that the support of the Nazis was really in response to the threat of communism? In other words, the support of the wealthy of the Nazis because they were afraid that communists would basically go after their assets?
I'm sure for some in that sector of Nazi support, that was authentically what was driving them. That, you know, there were forces to the left, socialists, communists, revolutionaries, etc., who threatened assets, prosperity, private business, etc. And the Nazi nationalism was a buttress against that. And the Nazis had bodies and arms and would be able to sort of fight back against that. So, you know, to some extent, in some part of the spectrum, that is authentic.
Great, thank you. There was one question that I wanted to just share with you, and then we'll wrap this part up, which is, what is the biggest takeaway that we should get from this lecture as teachers?
That voting is more than election day, that being informed and voting carefully is really the most responsible way to exercise this, you know, this precious opportunity that we have.
Thank you so much. This was really a wonderful presentation. Like I said, I learned a lot, and I think that based on the comments in the chat, I think the participants did as well. We look forward to learning with you again in the near future. Thank you so much, Professor Barrett, for making the time for us this morning. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and we're going to reconvene at about 10:20, and we'll turn the floor over to Brian Carlin. Again, thanks to Professor Barrett. So stick with us, and we'll be back at 10:20.
Thank you so much, Paul and everyone.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our first presentation by Professor Barrett. I thought it was really, really great, and I learned a lot. We're now really honored to have Brian Carlin, who will be sharing with us resources about elections that educators can use in their classrooms. Let me tell you a little bit about Brian. Brian Carlin grew up in Brooklyn, and he has been working for the New York City Department of Education for the past 30 years as a social studies teacher, a staff developer, and as a supervisor. He has served as project director on several history grants and has been involved with the writing and supporting of several more. Brian has presented professional development workshops at national conferences around the country and serves all 1,700 New York City schools as the director of social studies. Brian works with teachers to infuse local history, art, culture, and media together to help engage all students. His 3 children all attended New York City public schools, and we're delighted that Brian Carlin has made time for us this morning. It's a very busy day, and without further ado, I'm pleased to hand the microphone over to Brian.
All right, thank you. I want to echo that the new presentation was great, very interesting, very timely. And I think as teachers, we can think of ways we want to apply that to our classrooms because we want to build knowledge any way we can. And there's a lot of stuff in there. And then I'm not nearly as engaging or as interesting a speaker, so I'll try to do my best. But thank you for giving me part of the day. And I want to apologize for any background noise. We have, as part of our office, we're doing workshops now with over 600 people remotely, and then we have several things going on. So I'll do my best to also keep my voice down because I'm not going to interfere with their workshops, and I hope that we're all we can hear okay. So, but thank you. So today is election day, and around the nation, people will be casting their ballots for what they believe is the best choice for the future of the country. In doing this, we're continuing to sustain the great experiment of the promise of America as described by Abraham Lincoln, a government of the people, by the people. However, there's more to sustaining and protecting democracy than just the ability to vote. As our previous speaker said, it was a good segue. Participation in the democratic process is more than casting a ballot. If that were the case, then so many of our students would feel as though they had no voice or saying things that would happen to them until they were 18. And one of the organizations we work with, Nick for Challenge, has a saying, young people aren't apathetic, they're uninvited. So our job is to find how do we make students feel invited. So our job is to make young people part of the democratic process at the earliest of ages. Our work through resource creation and professional development is to activate student and teacher learning to bring democracy in New York City to life. Together with districts, schools, communities, and external partners, we champion student voice, support teachers, and build democratic K-12 classrooms across New York City. Our goal is to foster in every student a lifelong commitment to civic action and informed participation in their local and global communities. So what happens after Election Day? President Kennedy once said, democracy is never a final achievement. It is a call to an untiring effort. No matter who is elected, our students need to understand that democracy needs to be supported and protected. Our work to empower students to ensure that they are well informed and are learning how to be civically engaged continues. Are our democratic values that are enshrined in our founding documents being upheld? Are all our people's rights respected and protected? What are we doing to make sure that students are receiving factual information? How are we ensuring that students ask questions and are engaged in discussions that respect each other, even when they disagree? To be clear, this work is not easy. And in coming days, weeks, or even months, our democratic institutions might face many challenges. The easiest thing to do is nothing. But it is our obligation and duty as educators to meet these challenges and help our students understand what is going on and even empower them to make informed decisions. President Carter put it this way: the experience of democracy is like the experience of life itself, always changing, infinite in its variety, sometimes turbulent, and all the more valuable for having been tested in adversity. So I'd like to share with you some of the resources the New York City Department of Education Social Studies and Civics teams has been continuing to put together to address the needs of all our students in over 1,700 schools to meet these challenges. So again, thank you for having me here. So I want to share, first of all, I'm going to share my screen. You can see it now. I'm going to do it in not the cool mode, but this mode so I can get to links. So again, my name is Brian Carlin. As I was the director of social studies, we do have a full social studies and civics team. You're going to have access to this presentation, so you could if you're in New York City, if you're a New York City schools teacher, we have partner districts, we have lots of things going on, and you can outreach to us for support. So that's our social studies and civics team. They're all engaged in professional learning right now. Some of the things we do. So Department of Social Studies, we make the New York City DOE curriculum for social studies. It came out in 2016. We started working in 2014. It is the only content for New York City that is self-created by the DOE with its school administrators, teachers, district administrators, professors, universities, units of study from K to 12. It's called Passport to Social Studies. And our work is that we feel our work is never finished. And so therefore we have companion resources, our Hidden Voices project, our supplements to increase representation in diversity in our curriculum and to bring in stories of underrepresented and marginalized communities. It's an ongoing project. We have several versions of Hidden Voices. Our Civics for All curriculum, which teaches more about the civic engagement aspect of civic learning. We have a remote version of it called on iLearn. We provide professional learning all year long for schools, districts, administrators, teachers, and we work with cultural partners like the Museum of Jewish Heritage and other institutions around the city to provide the professional learning. And we are continuing to develop, and we constantly develop the resource guides to support whether it's current events or voting or anything like that. Some more of our resources. We also have a full line of comic books that we've created. We have 28 comic books right now, continuing to develop more. All right, is there something wrong? Saying, okay, that wasn't for me. All right, I was just looking at the chat. We have digital versions of our lessons. We have our comics, we have our new voices, and constantly creating new resources to meet the needs of teachers. So one of the things we're here about today is how to election resources. So one of the things I'd like to share, because I think this is important, and it really goes to the idea of we can have discussions on politics, we can discussions on opinions, but it's about creating that atmosphere in your environment, in your classroom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody a chance to read something. This is a guidance on how to have students engage in when students have different opinions. One of the things that we want to do is, it could be nerve-wracking for a teacher. If I have people with different opinions, I don't want kids to get upset. I don't want them to argue. I don't want them to fight. But we need to have students learn how to engage. You can have a difference of opinions about that respect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this link in the chat, and hopefully everybody can access this. Let me know. And if you could just, if everybody can just perhaps tell me with a thumbs up or a yes, you can access it, then we'll know issues. Let's see. You can see. Okay, we got it. Okay, cool. So here's what I'd like you to do. Take, and I'll drop in the chat again, just in case you missed it. What I'd like you to do is take now, this would be an in-person kind of thing I would do, but I just want to share with you as a pedagogical approach. Take a look at this document. 3 things that you think are important from the reading, and maybe things that you agree with, a couple of things you agree with, and maybe some things that you have questions about. And then what we'll do for our platform here, right? If it's important from the reading, I think this was important. Just throw it in the chat. And then we'll share it because we'll be able to see what you write. Things that you're thinking about, or anything you agree with, put that there. I agree with this. Or things that you have a question about, just throw that in the chat. So take a few minutes. I think that it's a 1-page document. I think it's an important one for teachers to think about having students engage in political discussions, especially when it comes to elections and people are talking about issues, and perhaps even more importantly, even after the election, when people are still talking about issues, because election day doesn't just come and say, okay, we're done. We're not going to talk about this for another year or 4 years. It's about building that sustainable environment. So does everybody understand what to do? I think so.
So we're going to actually ask one or two volunteers.
Yes, I will be sharing. Actually, you know what? I'll share right now. I'll share the, I see the question about, I'll share the whole link with you. I should have done that first. My apologies.
Awesome. Mine will go off.
And I see comments come in, but I'll wait till some more people have a chance to read it. Seen a lot of good comments. No, your questions and comments are open to just the panelists and hosts. So just me and Paul and Leah.
No, that's excellent and perfect. Great. So for this stage, hypothetically, if a group of students had gone to the steering committee and said, we want a school store that offers, um, you know,
I can give it another minute. I'm gonna start reading through some of these because they're actually excellent. Unless for some reason you don't want me to read yours, and then I won't. Well, I'm not gonna say anybody's name. So.
So it's important that adult can kind of throw that back in students' voice to say, well, according to chancellor, that's blah, 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 we actually think X, Y, or Z. So like, what is that?
And again, I want to stress that the reason why I'm having you read this isn't easy work. This is hard. We all have opinions. We all have biases. Yeah. So it's hard for us to even check those. But we have to be diligent about that. We have to be cognizant of that. And also, one of the easiest things to do is just say, you know what, I'm going to deal with this. And I'm going to go. There's a million things in our curriculum that we can teach. We know we're always behind as teachers. It's always so much to do. It's easy to just say, yeah, you know, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this thing that I had to do today. So I think that's why it's important to have this discussion. And I appreciate all the great comments here. All right, so I'm going to start going through some of these. And if I don't read yours, there's a lot of great stuff. I don't have time to read them all, but I'm going to say we're recording this. So I think that's great. Encouraging students to use evidence to support statements. The emphasis on maintaining safe space. In discussion, the students are more likely to engage openly when they feel respected and valued. Yeah, that ability, I think that ties into using the evidence. I'm using evidence, so therefore, you know, it's going to help me maybe establish that where it's not just how I feel or think. Here's my opinion, and here's the reason. Here's the evidence I have for that. I agree that I'm maintaining safe space for discussion. Students are more likely to engage openly when they feel respected and valued. We've seen a lot about the respect and value. Evidence, a lot on the evidence, using evidence, very important. And the other thing that's important is where is the evidence from, right? How are we, you know, and I think a lot of people, we talk about social media, stuff like that. So teaching students to be news literacy and looking for factual information and debunking false information, that's a skill, and it's a hard one to fight. False information is shared more often than real information. Evidence-based, Socratic seminars. The Socratic seminars are good. It takes time, preparation to have students learn how to do those, but those can be very powerful. Place an emphasis on evidence. Make sure a lot of people fight on the evidence-based, fact-based. Avoid elevating your own opinions. Yeah, that's a real. I mentioned your own biases. It's hard. It's hard to do that, but you also have to be mindful and cognizant. And I think acknowledging that's the first step in doing that. We should responsibly correct factual errors in information. Yes, responsibly, carefully, thoughtfully, be on the lookout for it, and teach students how to identify misinformation. Considering exit tickets for students to communicate, writing down, giving students a space to write is helpful too. It helps them organize their thoughts. Pointed questions. That's good.
So those are just
might be implicated actions connected to the idea of expressing, I think, is critical. Students should be encouraged to think about implications of actions. What happens if? That's a good point. Educators must model standards and decency and tolerance at all times. There's a lot here. You guys did great. Effective civic education includes and promotes high-level active class position among students, teachers, while enabling students to participate, demonstrate their points of view, must maintain a class sense of nurturing and safe spaces. My students have been pressing me for weeks to try who I'm voting for. Yeah, that was always when I was in the classroom, that was always that the students wanted to know who you're voting for. And yeah, it's our obligation to not tell them who we're voting for. They might make short conclusions, they might have inferences, but there's once it's weird in today's environment. It was that it's this us versus them split side kind of thing, and it's a bit of a challenge. I mean, we're not going to lie. Um, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But yeah, we need to be as best as we can to be apolitical in our discussions. Okay, so these are great. I mean, you can go on for a while with these. I hope everybody enjoyed this document and will find it useful. Please share. Where is this from? This is the heart of what we do. So we create curricular resource. This is in every volume of our Civics for All curriculum. And we have the Civics for All curriculum is in grade bands K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 to 12. And so it's in one of the resources there. And we're going to come to some of that. And we're actually going to dig deeper into some of our resources now as well. And then at the end, we'll ask any questions. So what I'd like to do is have you take a look at some of our lessons. And depending on what grade you teach, it's up to you. Lessons that connect to elections. We have a variety of different election resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the chat. You also have the link to the presentation. But this is going to take you to a page that has a list of lessons. On the left-hand side of this list, which actually I'll open it up now. So what you'll have is, this is from our Civics Week last year. And what we have is a list of different, and our theme was democracy needs you. So different grades, different grade bands with different lessons. So on the left-hand side, this will bring you to the full resource guide, but you don't have to click on it. If you go here on the right-hand side, you will get to a PDF of a specific lesson. What I'd like you to do is whatever lesson you want to look at, depending on what grade. Now you'll see grades 3 through 5, 6 to 8, and then 9 to 12. Whatever grade you're teaching, pick a lesson, any lesson that you want. And what I'd like you to do, after you pick that lesson, what are the students doing? How would you, I need to, that's a question. Good job, Ryan. How would you modify this lesson? And one way this lesson can make a connection to elections. Can everybody open the link to get to the lessons? Okay, so if you can take some time to do that, we'll give you a few minutes to look at the lesson there. Usually we'll have the lesson and the resources for the lesson will follow. Thank you. I'll take no credit for this. The civics team put this all together and I'm riding on their coattails on this one. So, but I'm happy to share the work that they've been doing by putting this together. So if you click, how do I open a lesson? So if you click on, actually, let me pull the page back up. If you click on the, not the left, but on the right, you should find a PDF. And you can scroll, see the lesson. Some of the data and documents can be updated. Well, here's the thing. You could, that would be a modification if you needed to, if it's outdated material, you needed an updated thing, depending on the lesson or resource you're using. I would be careful about what we change as far as data. I want to make sure we're doing something reliable. So is everybody able to access the lessons and take a look at the lesson? Cool. All right. I'm gonna mute myself because of the noise here, but let's say it's 10:41. We'll give let's say
Gotcha.
10:50. I will come back to this discussing. Take a chance, look at the lesson, and if you have more time to look at two. I didn't say I don't know why one is starred. Let me take a look. It could have been a specific reason. Let me check. They're all in training right now. It might have something to do with it because this was put together for Civics Week last week in my last year, this year in March. It could have something to do with if you were doing something specifically for Civics Week, or they were recommending one particular lesson. I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I will find out. I don't. But the idea that the resources are designed to stand alone. So it wouldn't really matter for our purposes here. It's how do we connect to the idea of these were connecting to the theme of democracy. So that's why I thought it would be relevant for today's talk. I don't know about the audio if you're talking about there's a link or something. Someone asked about my contact information. I will surely share my email with everyone. Yeah, so to be clear, the civics for all the resources created by the Department of Social Studies and Civics are all public facing and accessible. The only thing is our passport curriculum needs to have a DOE login. Everything else, our hidden voices, our civics materials, our resource guides, all public facing. Yet I'm not going to take this down. So you have access to this. Yeah, all public facing. So it's all there. It's not going anywhere.
I like the first one. I'm jumping in.
The only thing we do is we acknowledge that we're not perfect. So we do update resources. So one of the things I will be sharing after this is the our election resource guide, updated, and also keep adding for post-election stuff. So all one in one place. So we're going to be adding to that as well. I see a lot of comments, so I'm going to go through some of these. And thank you for participating in this way. So, and some people mentioned turnkey. What I would say is a turnkey, what I would do this if I was doing this in person in your school, I would have groups of teachers look at the lessons and then have them do this together. We actually have a tool, which if you reach out to me, I'll share with you. It's a lesson exploration tool, which if you've been to any of our PDs, you've probably seen it before, where you really take apart what the teacher's doing, what the students are doing. How would I adjust this and modify this? Because it's a suggested way to teach a lesson, but you know your students, you would have to make it work for them. And how would you do that? So I would say if you were doing this to turnkey, and I think it's a great idea to share, we want people to share this as far and wide as possible to do it that way. But let's, using the space we're in, let's see what some of our comments were. Thank you very much for being so engaged. I know this is, Zoom can be on these days, can be like, I'm going to turn my screen off and I'm just going to sit, but I really appreciate you guys digging into these lessons. I would modify the lesson center along election campaigns or the students to use more prevalent and continuous ads that are pushed toward the country and give them something they can identify with or against. Okay, yeah, that's, so ads will constantly be new and changing. So, and looking for, that's where that you really want to teach kids to, how to identifying bias, rhetoric, all these kinds of things in there, which are important because an ad campaign is designed to make you think a certain way, no matter who it's for, right? Students are fact checking, students use headlines in small groups. I would modify it. Makes sense. Students, I wouldn't mind it. Makes sense. Students are learning the process of fact checking. You can use it to hold politicians accountable and enrich their own knowledge. It connects rather than directly due to false statements that are propagated by those running for office and are corresponding to need to know the truth. My modification would be the connection to the elections and their subsequent ramifications for the image of campaigning candidates. I chose a Just Society lesson 1. In this lesson, students analyze quotes by various historical and political figures, establish what justice really means. I would modify this lesson by finding quotes from other pop culture because students be more likely to buy in. I can see that too. The philosophical foundation of the Constitution is an amazing lesson. I just finished discussing the topic with my students a long time ago. Yeah, part of it's also part of, and resources we had before we made our civic curriculum was the idea we had our foundational, this is how the system works, this is the background knowledge, but some of the movement for civics role is then about engagement. So you'll see we have a balance of knowledge and engagement and participation. The enlightened thinking cards are tools that can help students enhance their learning. These lessons are perfect. I don't think they're perfect, but appreciate it, Dick. I was always told that there are no perfect lessons, just people trying to do their best to make them successful. Having an effect on election without voting, you can encourage them to research the candidates and watch the debates. You can have them make a poster, brochure. Great. Up to the media lesson, I thought it was really interesting how they use president's tweets to be at the base of the lesson. That would drive student interest. It is okay. So it is outdated. Yeah. So some of the things that these were made a number of years ago, and we normally try to avoid when we're making the lessons and curriculum, as opposed to resource guide and current events responses. We try to not use something too recent because you don't know. We need a little time to step back in resource development. We do need to do some updates for some of our passport stuff. So that is a good point, and that's where you, as a teacher, can bring in to update some things like that. Students are evaluating themselves in different lessons, and the image of perspective. Well, I would provide more student-centered discussions. Okay. Uh, I looked at the voter on since May. Voter suppression students are looking at flow cartoons, 6 primary sources, and poll tax latest tests. I would make having students actually take a literacy test, see how difficult. Yeah, I think that's one of our passport lessons does that as well. I make a copy of it tonight. Keep, yeah, you can make a copy and keep it. It's yours. Once you make a copy, yeah, you can't edit our version, but you can make a copy and then it's yours. Thank you. I will say you're welcome, but I didn't organize them. The civics team did. I mentioned the gerrymandering. Yeah, gerrymandering is a great topic and it's hard to explain. And I think what we try to do is you can't do everything, but you try to find topics that might be of interest. Research on having students are looking at youth movements in the past. I like the idea of connecting to elected officials. Voter suppression lesson is excellent. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for taking a chance to look at it. And I'll be sure to share your feedback with the team. They'll be excited to know that. Sometimes we work in silos and we don't get that kind of feedback, so that's nice to hear. What I will share with you next is these are our, we have a hub where all our resources are located. Actually, I'm going to take you to that now. Actually, before we go here, so this is our hub. These are all our different resources. So we have our Passport to Social Studies, which is our K-12 curriculum, and you can get any grade from here. This is the only thing you'll need a login for. So if you were teaching 4th grade, and you want to teach unit, look at unit 2, we use units of study. We don't have a textbook. You would click here, and then you would need your DOE login to access WeTeach. Everything we put up is on WeTeach, but then our Civics for All curriculum is do not need. And this is where you put the lessons from. You don't need a login to access this for WeTeach, but it is on WeTeach. And how do I? Okay, sorry. Come on. I need that to go away. All right. Okay. Share a couple more things. I'll go back to we have our, so we go to resources. We have our hidden voices work, which we have posters, we have lesson plans, we have guides, all different resources, and we are working on new ones right now. We are currently working on Latinos, should be out soon, and we're working on a Jewish American hidden voices and a Muslim American hidden voices as well. Go back. We have our comics. We have 28 comic books that we have created. This is our latest one, History of the New York City Draft Riots. I see the Spanish version. The only thing we do have in Spanish is our K-8 workbooks are translated into 10 different languages. That we do have that in Spanish. And then our current events, resource guides. So as situations come up, we're actually working on our resource guide for the Sudan crisis in Sudan right now. That should be out soon. But this is what we're here for elections, right? So these are our different resources for voting for elections. This is our election resource guide right here. And some of the lessons that you just saw will be a part of this. This takes you to lots of different documents and things that you can use when talking about and teaching about elections. I'm not going to go into all these, but you'll have the opportunity to see these. You have access to all these. We make a voting guide. We update it all the time. Meeting the moment, something a city is a comprehensive approach to response to current events. And there is actually a post-election resource guide, which is up now as well. I don't have a link for that. It's actually we're gonna keep updating it into this, so it's going to be all one spot. So actually, let me see. No, I will follow up with that. If you the post-election guide, I thought it was in here, but I think it's in a different spot. So
yes and no. There's always things that happen, but
that's what I got. So let me go back to here. And that's our hub. That's a link to it. Oh, yes, we're trying to be culturally responsive, culturally diverse. That's what our goal is, that students see, not just see themselves, but they see others as well. What's translated in Spanish is we made student workbooks for our passport K-8 instructional materials, the student facing materials. So the K-8 workbooks are available digitally. You email me, I can send you those. They're a little tricky to get to, but they weren't meant to be digital, but we did make them available because of the demand and need for it. But the student workbooks are available for the K-8 because the idea of the student workbooks were so teachers didn't have to make photocopies all the time. But I'll answer any questions that anybody has. You'll email me, I'll follow you up because it gets a little complicated getting the access to the student work. No, I'm not gonna email you, email me. I'm not gonna remember everybody's email from the chat. So I'll put it in again. And today might not be the day to do it, but write it down and email me tomorrow or later today because my mailbox is getting a little full with Padlets right now.
Brian, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. These resources are so impressive. I mean, as when we had the time to look at them, I really saw kind of the richness of what you guys have put together. It's really fantastic. And it's kind of exciting because my daughter is actually has a fellowship at a school in Brooklyn, and they're doing government. So a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, she's been telling me that she's been learning in class, and I think actually one of her teachers might be on our PD this morning. So
Oh, great.
it's really exciting. Somebody asked, I think you answered most of the questions, but somebody asked about where to get the comic books.
Oh, let me show you this. If you're in New York City school, if you're in New York City, actually, let me share my screen again so I can show.
Thank you.
We can actually, oh wait, I got a screen 2. All right, you can see my screen again?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you go to resources, so let's go to comics, right? We have a feature on here. You need hard copies.
Yeah.
So you can use this. And you just fill this out and we'll send copies to your school. It will take you through all our different resources. So if you don't want, you just want the comics, just want a specific comic, you just follow this form and it'll take you there. So you fill it out and you go to next, and it'll go directly to you. And when we deliver, because all these have been sent, not all the comics, because some haven't been shipped. They're available online, we've printed, but they haven't been shipped. And when our hidden voices and our curriculum goes out, it goes to the principal. And sometimes it goes to the principal and it doesn't necessarily go to the teachers. So, but these will go directly to you because you'll be filling out a request form.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And that's on the hub.
Thank you. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. I think, like I say, I think you answered most of the questions. But I'm just looking to see if anything else. Yeah. No, really great. And that first document that you shared about having civil conversation is really very important. But all of this stuff is really great. And I mean, I know that the teachers most of the teachers here probably are familiar with some of it, but
you never know. We never know. To be honest, and I do appreciate the kind words, and I'm going to share this with the team. I think they'll appreciate it too. Is that we live in a time when social studies and civics aren't prioritized, and so that's a challenge we face. When we hear about other initiatives, I won't name them, but other initiatives here that rhyme with reads and solves, that becomes a bit of a challenge for us. So we do appreciate that, and any feedback, invite us, let us see what's going on in your school. We want to see, we want to hear, we want to be able to highlight these things. And yeah, as far as I'm glad there's interest in the hidden voices and the comics, and we'll do a plug here, Paul. We're going to be coming and doing PD with you guys in sessions in the next few months. So
Yes,
hopefully these people that are on the call will show up in person and be involved in that, and they'll learn more about our curriculum, resources, and our connection to the museum and other things.
definitely. No, we look forward to that, and it's a pleasure to work with you and work with your team. And we're looking forward to this upcoming PDs. So thank you so much.
You got it. So I'll say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Museum of Jewish Heritage, for hosting this. This was great. Great session. And I hope happy election day, everybody.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take a 2-minute break, and then we're going to come back, and I'm just going to show some images of. Take care, Brian. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to just show images of some of the election materials that we have in our collection at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We'll just give everybody a stretch break, and we'll go into that. Hope everybody is still with us. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to share just some images that'll actually kind of illustrate some of the things that Professor Barrett was talking about earlier on. But hopefully these are things that could be used also in your classrooms. I'm going to just go ahead and start sharing those right now. Okay, so these are images that reflect mostly the interwar period, but not exclusively the interwar period. And as of now, I don't know if they're actually available, but we are working to make our collection online, digitized and online. So hopefully within the next 6 months or so, they will be online. So this is a fascinating image from the early interwar period from 1919. And it says it's Arbeiter Hunger, Tod Nacht, Streik, Tod Arbeit or not. So workers' hunger brings death close. Strike destroys, work nourishes. This is an anti-union, anti-strike kind of poster from the early interwar period. And this is an interesting, also from the early interwar period, one of the early elections in the Weimar Republic. It's kind of interesting because it kind of foretells things that are going to happen later on in the Weimar Republic. I believe this is from 1919, from January 1919. And it's a caricature of the different parties. The top 3 parties are various communist or socialist parties. I guess they're socialist parties. Spartacus, independent, and I'm not sure what Mehrheits, I guess majority socialist parties, all right, with the crazy kind of caricatures. And then also the bottom is the German Democratic Party, which also with a crazy caricature. But interestingly, the more serious parties are the right-wing parties here. This is why I say this kind of adumbrates what's going to happen, or kind of foreshadows what's going to happen in the future, with the Christian Party, the Christian People's Party, the German People's Party, and the German National People's Party. Again, just things that you could possibly use. This is an interesting poster, and I think, and I hope, by the way, that you have questions and comments on these. I'm going through them quickly, but maybe I should ask you. Let's take a look and see if I can see if you have any comments. Like, what do you think is going on in this poster? Okay, let me see if I can see this share here. Nope, nope. 1 second. Okay. All right, so I can see some of the, great, I can see, thank you so much for these responses here. Okay, welcome. All right, so communists bringing the Reichstag, communism crushing democracy, sparking rebellion, communists destroying German government structure, threats of Russian communist aversion. Great. I think it's condemning communism. Interestingly, okay, these are excellent, excellent comments. Thank you. Let me see if I can go back now to the poster. All right. I've somehow lost it. Give me 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to just stop the share for a second, but I will reshare it. But okay, let me share it again. There we go. Okay. So I liked all the comments you said. What's interesting about this particular poster is that it says vote communist, but I think that it is I think as some of you may have noted, I think it is a sarcastic kind of approach to this. Okay, great. All right. Let's take a look at another poster. And this is an anti-communist one. Not excuse me, an anti-Nazi poster. Okay, which is a vote like which must be VSPD, must be something like the People's Socialist Party. I'm not exactly sure. Okay. Happy to have comments. I'm not necessarily the final authority on these things, but I thought it'd be worthwhile sharing them. Okay, thank you for your comments. Okay. And let's take a look at this poster here. This is actually an advertisement for Mein Kampf. And I think, well, I'd like to hear what you guys think about it. What do you think about this particular presentation? Okay. Well, I guess what I'm thinking about, yes, it's right. Okay. The fact that this is something probably from the early 30s, that's presenting him as respectable, serious. Um, you're reading you're reading a book. Yes, somebody here says it makes it look like a legitimate book ad. Exactly. And it says, study Hitler through his book, You Can Get to Know Him, basically. Um, yeah, we could probably get a translation. It's not would not be a hard thing to make a translation. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are definitely translations of the book. Correct. You use Google Translate. But I guess for me, the thing that makes this so interesting is how um, kind of proper it is. Here's another poster, also from the late 20s and early 30s, and this says an end to corruption, and be happy and interested to hear your comments. Right, drain the swamp rhetoric. Interestingly, as we yeah, hyper masculine. Good point. I should be able to share it. Yeah, it is violent. Yeah, yeah. Very good point. It could be a female fist, but I do think it is hyper masculine. I think also the use of the red. Oh, the thing that I was going to say earlier is also the very strong anti-Soviet or anti-communist aspect of it. If you look here on the chair in the back. Right. It's propaganda saying the Nazis are competent in stamping out corruption. Exactly. Yes. Another comment here. The Nazis believed in very conservative gender roles. True. Okay, and red was also the color of Nazis. Okay, excellent. These are excellent observations. Let me show you another. I have a couple more posters I want to show you. I hope you're finding this interesting. Okay, and another comment is it could be effective. People hate government corruption. That's true. Okay, just have another couple more. Okay, so let's take a look at this one here. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this poster. And I can translate it for you. I'll read it, I'll translate it. It says, Die Armee der Arbeit und des Friedens antwortet dem Führer mit Ja. The army of labor and peace answers the Führer with yes. So question is whether I can share these posters or the slide deck. I'm going to find out if I have the permission to do it. And if so, I will share them with you. Please be in touch with me and or with Aaliyah, and we will find out if we have the rights to share them, the permission to share them. Okay, okay, here's a good comment. Many excellent comments, actually. So this one is, it uses propaganda to make him seem like a man of the people. Okay. So co-opting labor as pro-Nazi. Okay, so that was a fascinating observation, and actually that was something that Professor Barrett was talking about, right? That they were hoping to bring in as supporters both the people on the right and the people on the left. Okay, and here's another great comment. It's connecting Hitler to labor and economic prosperity, also making him seem like he is a friend of the working class and supported by them. Here's an interesting one. Hitler wants to be in control. So the person who wrote that, do you want to explain why it seems like Hitler wants to be in control? Why this poster seems to suggest that? Makes him look like the little guy. Okay, well he's handling the shovel like the other guys are. True. The other guys are just carrying the shovel. He himself is you know, seems to be shoveling dirt. Here's another comment. Classic commonizing of a leader to make them appeal to the working class and maybe loosely responsible to the failing of monarchs of the time. Interesting. Because regimes don't move without feet and hands underneath them. I can try to make it full screen. Last time I made it full screen, I wasn't able to read the comments. Let's see if we can do it. There we go. Okay, and I can still read the comments now. Okay. You know, one thing that I think is kind of ironic about this poster is that everything that you, by the way, you said I think is valid, that he's a man of the depicts him as a man of the people, and so on, and a man of the work, you know, supporting the working class. But I think it's kind of ironic that it's looks like he's dumping dirt on them. Was not obviously the intention of the poster, but I think it's kind of ironic to think about that. Okay, and I have one more poster I want to show you. Yeah, he's crushing the people like he's acting like one of the people. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Wow. No, these are great. These are great comments. Thank you. Okay, and this is actually the last one that I just wanted to share with you. And this is from the I guess it's the election after the Anschluss. There was, I guess, a rubber stamp election. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about this as well. It was the rubber stamp election in Austria approving the the unification of Austria with Germany in 1938. Yeah, the yeah is a lot bigger than the no. So true. As if it's the obvious kind of answer, right? Like it's not as if one answer is equal to the other answer. Good point. Yeah, it's kind of a mind game. But by the way, it's the reunification, and the yes is in red, correct. And by the way, I was just reading the words there. It's the reunification of Austria with the German Reich. Yeah, interesting. That's right. The Noah's off the side, making it feel like you're going against the tide. Excellent. Fantastic. So these are really great comments. I know we didn't necessarily discuss as a group the beginning ones. Well, the first two we didn't get a chance really to discuss. But let me stop the screen sharing. I just wanted to see, were there any other questions that anybody had at this time or comments they want to share? Yeah, I'm glad they made you think. I think that was the idea, was to be able to use them as as sort of as triggers for thinking about the history. Okay, well, we're ending a little bit earlier than we expected. Um, I would like to turn the floor over to my colleague Aliyah Shon. Before we do, though, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope that you found it useful. Just before Aliyah closes out the program, just would appreciate just hearing from you. You will have more of an opportunity as well for evaluation, but let me turn the floor over to Aliyah. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and now my colleague Aliyah.
Thank you, Paul. And also thank you to Professor John Barrett, as well as Brian Carlin, and of course, Paul, including. And thank you for to everyone who joined us today. So after the program, I will send out an evaluation form and CTLE application to those who are here today. Our next program will be our in-person open house for teachers in grades 4 to 12 on November 11th. We will be offering guided tours to our exhibitions, so you will be able to sample the exhibitions and consider them for your students. And please join us on Sunday, December 15th for Messages from Survivors, One Family's Holocaust Legacy. This program will feature an innovative approach that blends survivor experiences together with film and art in a compelling way. For more information and to register for any of these events, please check your email for our e-blasts featuring our professional developments, or go to our website, www.mjhnyc.org, and click on events. And thank you once again.
All right, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us. I want to wish everybody a great day. If you would like to reach us, you could email either education@mjhnyc.org, or if you want, you could email me at p.radensky@mjhnyc.org. I know, yes, thank you, Aliyah. Excellent. Because I know some people had some questions. I want to make sure that we're able to answer those questions or provide those resources. And with that, I want to wish all of you a fantastic day. Again, many thanks to Professor Barrett, to Brian Carlin, and to my colleague Aliyah Shon. And have a great day, everybody.